Well, I guess we didn't get a green light. I guess we're going to start right now. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know it's later in the day and people are thinking of alcohol, but I think this will be an interesting panel because, first of all, I have a very diverse group of people who are well-versed in the topic, but gray markets are generally misunderstood, and then to try and navigate that through what will be a legitimate business opportunity will be kind of interesting. And so why don't you first just introduce yourself quickly, and then I'll fire away.
Okay. Paris Smith, formerly the CEO of Pinnacle Sports, now doing advising and consulting.
I'm Steven Salz. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Rivalry. We're a Gen Z-focused sportsbook.
Hi, good afternoon. Kelci, Binau, gaming attorney with McDonald, Carano out of Reno, Nevada.
So I think the first way to start the conversation is there's a lot of confusion about black markets, white markets, gray markets, purple markets. And so the question is, how would you define a black, gray, white, purple market?
I think that there are categories that there lacks definition. You know, earlier we said, you know, it seemed as though there was more, if it's black, it's gray, it's wrong. And that's not 100. Of course, black is, you know, that you don't want to go into the black markets. But there's regulated, where a jurisdiction regulates the market. Then there's also a regulated, unregulated market. And, you know, the reality is the progression that we've had started from the people being in the unregulated. You know, once it became black, it was the black market for the U.S., for example, and many people pulled out. But, you know, we still had to operate our businesses and focus on the rest of the world is what I call it. So it's regulated, unregulated, and then there's the black market. And that's what's completely prohibited. The U.S. and every company, they can look at their risk and decide, you know, do they want to go to the U.K.? Do they want to go to Germany? But, you know, there is not a lot of ambiguity in where the black markets are.
Yeah, so I think slightly different answer maybe for me. So I think up until 5 years ago, the answer to that was the kind of classic view of black markets, gray markets, regulated markets that most of us would be familiar with as a framework. And my view now from, I'd say 5 years ago until today, and this is to caveat not necessarily how Rivalry operates, but more because we're in, you know, about 90% of our active users are under the age of 30, I think we're exposed to a side of the internet and where people operate that is different than other operators. And in the last 5 years, technology has developed in such a way that, in my view, the way that many people are starting to look at this that are new operators and coming into the space is that a gray market is simply a place that, as enabled through technology, is accessible. And unfortunately, I think in many cases that actually includes regulated markets and other places where we see operators now that have the ability, again, through development in technology over the last 5 years that makes it possible to access these markets. So I think, yes, you could look at some of those as regulated and from a previous 5 year ago definition would not be legit and probably isn't today still from a legal framework. But I think the reality is just changing now, and the landscape of the internet is changing in such a way where there are markets that are accessible and impossible to shut down these operators, and they treat many markets as, call it, gray markets that I think many in this room wouldn't. So I think the terrain is changing a lot in the last 5 years.
Do you have anything you want to add, or?
Yeah, I agree. I think with the technological advancements, overturn of PASPA, at least here in the States, legalization of sports betting, iGaming in a few states, sort of our skill-based apps, DFS, daily fantasy sports. I think that gray market, that gray space has really expanded, and I think as technology advances, it's just going to continue to expand. And I think whether operators have access or not to those doesn't necessarily move it more towards white market. I think it's still gray. It's just kind of, is it lighter gray, more muddy gray? Where are you in that gray space?
Yeah, and I think the genesis, and by the way, when I said purple markets, I made that up. There's no such thing, okay? Just want everyone to know that in case people are freaking out. But again, being from New Jersey gaming, I can say that I think we kind of set the standard on the definition of gray and black markets when I was at DGE with Dave Rebuck as director. We put out guidance, which in essence said that New Jersey and other regulators in the U.S. can't be the policemen of the world. And we don't really have the extraterritorial reach to challenge, let's say, Turkey, mainland China, about what their laws are, what they should be, how they're going to be interpreted in their jurisdictions. And so the standard that came up in New Jersey, which I think has been followed by most of the states in the U.S. without saying it explicitly, is that unless that jurisdiction concretely and affirmatively states that an offshore operator is not allowed to operate in their jurisdiction, either with a license or not at all, from the New Jersey Division of Gaming standard, and I think the one that's been accepted across the U.S., it's a gray market. And again, it gets back to there may be a law in mainland China. First of all, if you try and we translated that law, and it came out like 4 different ways with 4 different translators. Who knows if the government really believes in it? Who knows if the courts in that jurisdiction are actually going to uphold it? And so rather than speculating as to whether it's allowed or not allowed, our vision was, unless that jurisdiction makes it extremely clear, affirmatively and concretely, are the operative terms, we are going to treat it as a gray market, meaning acceptable. And I can say, and I don't know if Dave's in the room, but I can say we met with some opposition from operators back in 2014, but it really was the only workable standard, and that standard really has survived the test of time so far. So let's get into the other component of this is, and let me ask you, Steve, first, from a business opportunity standpoint, what is the risk-benefit analysis for someone deciding, do I launch in a gray market? How do you make that evaluation, and what do you consider in that analysis?
Yeah, I think it's the propensity for the market to regulate, which will change the nature of how you're currently operating there. Definitely for us, again, for Rivalry's perspective, is it a dark gray or black market, or is it lighter gray? We definitely trend towards the ones where we're Isle of Man licensed for our gray market. So I'd say that it's definitely on the lighter gray side and consistent with what most people would expect as a gray market. Things like payment access and the usual challenges of getting into these markets. But I think we try to be pretty forward-looking, where we actually prefer to be in gray markets that we think have a propensity to regulate in the future and build some base there, and then move and transition onto a regulated market in the future. That's like our view of it. But again, for my first answer, I think there's different answers to that question depending on what type of operator you are currently.
So before I get to Paris and Kelci, in that though, what is the analysis? What if, how do you determine if it's too dark a gray to take that chance, or is it's light enough gray to take that chance?
Yeah, the parameters for Rivalry I ran through, and I think we have a really clean view of it, and we tend to ones where we high comfort, a lot of other operators that are there, similar Isle of Man or Malta standard ones that we consider to be, let's say, higher quality gray market licenses. And again, maybe propensity to regulate in the future, which we would be comfortable with. I think for other operators, what's changed in the last 5 years, and I'm saying these are more internet native operators, is the attack vectors on shutting down a gray market operator has shifted in the last few years. So it used to be go after the individuals behind it, the payments or the domain. And now in the last 5 years, which is kind of unpacking my first answer, it is now possible to operate a consumer business on the internet where you can do it completely anonymously. So the going after the individuals behind it, that attack vector is gone. The other one was payments. Crypto has enabled rails where it can't possibly be shut down. So that was a great way where if you were a country that was a black market or regulated market or a dark gray market and you didn't want people there, you attack the payments. You can't go that route anymore. So that attack vector is gone. And then you have the domain where, again, it was possible to seize domains and go after them, shut them down, make it very difficult. And now, there's, for a lot of reasons, actually kind of birthed out of torrent and like predominantly torrent technologies, it is now possible to run a domain in a jurisdiction that may not want you there and keep it up forever. So yeah, that is a different framework that other operators now are going under, which is making essentially almost any market a gray market. I think that's the changing landscape that is not completely understood yet.
So, Paris, what's your risk-benefit analysis in that respect, or risk-reward?
Yeah.
Is another way to put it.
Well, I think it's, of course, you have to look at the payments and those types of things, but it's really what is your strategic vision? What is your plan? Do you want to go into regulated markets eventually? Then your appetite is going to be very different to that very, very light gray area. So I think, for me, if I was advising somebody, I would tell them, do you want to make this regulated? And it's not just regulation within the U.S. market. It's also the Canadian market, which is hopefully going to be coming more online, as well as other jurisdictions.
Kelci?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear Stephen's perspective, from the client's perspective, I guess, and their approach. And I agree with what Paris said. I think our clients really have to decide whether they eventually want to enter that regulated market or not, or whether they're already in that regulated and licensed environment or not. So clients come to us, I think, initially for like these multi-state memos, and then ultimately we evaluate the risk of entering those jurisdictions, and then it's their business decision, risk versus reward, whether they want to enter or not. And our conversation and analysis is completely different if we're dealing with like a land-based casino operator who might be looking into also entering online sports wagering versus like, a skill-based app who wants to avoid regulation in these jurisdictions, and we create an argument that they're kind of in that gray space and that their activity is lawful. So I think it's totally different. Also, I think startup versus established company, right? So startups, I just was in Vegas last Friday and we had a phone convo with a potential new client, and they are looking to build their customer base and looking to make profit, basically. And so they flat out said, look, we're willing to take a higher level of risk here. Can you do a multi-jurisdictional memo for us, analyze the risks, and we're willing to kind of enter into those higher risk jurisdictions, whereas our land-based casino operators likely wouldn't, because they're not just worried about, looking into one jurisdiction, but all the other jurisdictions that they hold licenses and are regulated under as well.
So being a former regulator, we're used to seeing those mercenary opinions written by law firms. And, Dave Rebuck knows, we've looked at them and said, yeah, pretty well written, but we don't care. But they do serve an important point, because, again, I think it allows the person under scrutiny or the company under scrutiny to show that they showed some concern.
Due
right?
diligence.
And they did some due diligence. They retained a reputable firm to make a somewhat plausible argument in some cases, some more plausible than others. And they've had the ability to show that to the regulator. And for lack of a better term, from a regulator standpoint, it changes the mens rea. It changes what we believe their thought process was, meaning they did want to try and do the best they could. But we understand that you can pay someone to write anything. And I see some of the Segev people are here, and all the law firms do that. And we don't get mad at them for doing it. That's their job. How does that work in the firm now? Like, when a client comes in, do you have to go to an opinion committee? Like, just briefly, how do you deal with that internally? And every word is careful, and then usually sometimes what happens is they'll write something in the body, and then if you read the footnote, they take it back. So tell us just a little bit about that.
Hey, I'm not going to have any clients after this.
No, you are. I'm saying how good a job you do.
No, totally true. I have a love-hate relationship with these memos also, because, like, as you said, in New Jersey, David Rebuck, I totally agree with him. He was speaking in terms of the New Jersey regulators, like, hey, we don't have all the information. We're not boots on the ground. We don't know how these jurisdictions are applying their laws or not, and so when a client, to answer your question, when a client comes in, they say, hey, can we do a multi-jurisdictional opinion? It could be 5 states, 50, whatnot. We analyze their platform or prospective business plan model under the state law, gaming law in each state, and then federal law as well, because there's some overlap there. And we do the best we can, right? And that's an initial survey. It's not an opinion letter. So our firm is not one of those that will just give you a 50-state opinion letter and say you're good to go. We'll do an initial survey, analyze the risk, organize it accordingly, and then I'm licensed in Nevada and California, so we would feel comfortable giving an opinion in whatever state we're licensed in. But for those clients, once we issue that 50-state survey, then the clients analyze risk level, whether they're comfortable entering into that jurisdiction or not. And then from there, because we are not the experts, right, in each jurisdiction, we'll either advise and connect them with local counsel in the jurisdiction for further guidance, and or take them to the regulators who they're going to have to be in front of and explain their product or services or whatnot to in the end anyway, who have the final say. So, and we do that anonymously, or we'll take the client with us for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a process.
Yes.
So, Paris, obviously you were there when UEGA was passed, and you were running Pinnacle. Yeah. And I assume, from what I understand, in several months after that, Pinnacle completely left the offshore market, meaning dealing with the United States players. From that time forward, did you have many opportunities through Pinnacle to enter other gray markets? And what was the calculus that was used? And did you use law firms? Did you use like KPMG and accounting firms? Like, what did Pinnacle do to decide whether they should enter a particular gray market or not?
I think, it's for entering a gray market, it's not really entering a gray market. You're out there, and then the gray markets come to you. So it's about what your strategy is for payments, for localization, for the product offering that you give, and so you're out there, and then the analysis comes, generally speaking, when you get a letter that says cease and desist. Right. So then, you evaluate what is that risk, what is the seriousness behind that. Then you get the legal opinion at that stage. And, at this stage, Pinnacle's out of more markets than they're in.
Right.
And that's just based on the evolution. And, there's always this, like, we have a definition of gray, but you have crypto. We're not changing definitions, but yet the whole entire infrastructure and ecosystem of the gaming industry is changing.
So it sounds like you want to add something to that, Steve.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Because it was interesting how you said the market comes to you, and so the sense is that it would be your duty to prevent you from being involved.
Well, but
it's coming to you as opposed to a decision being made to enter into.
Right, but you make a decision to enter into a regulated market.
Right, correct.
Right, so, but if there's a regulated market, for example, we had already pulled out of the UK, out of the US, out of Australia, out of Spain, France. I mean, literally, the list just goes on and on. So, but the .com exists, so people from all over the world can access that. Right. And then it's about pulling it back from that point.
Steve?
Yeah, no, it's fair. I think it's when you run a global brand, you'll have people coming from everywhere to register, and then it depends on your parameters of what you're willing to accept. And are you able to support them for payments? Are you looking to localize? And then, yes, within your regulatory framework of whatever your license, what do they consider black markets or not? So no, I think that's accurate.
Kelci, do you want to add anything or?
No.
Okay.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. And again, Kelci's in has to be careful on this subject, having writing opinions. But I think one other thing to really explain the process, and I see Dave Reedbuck showed up, so I'm glad he made it from lunch. But a perfect example is actually like Australia now is a black market. And people are like, well, wait a minute, that's not a black market, it's legal gaming. Well, it's a black market if you're not licensed. And so when that Director's Advisory Bulletin came out, concrete, affirmative, et cetera, I think 2 or 3 years later, Australia changed their federal law and made it very clear that you could not be a remote operator in Australia unless you were licensed. Pretty affirmative, pretty clear. The law was clear. And then they wrote to Dave Reedbuck in New Jersey and said, hey, we just changed our law. And by the way, we're going to enforce this across the board. And anyone who's not licensed, who's acting remote, who's taking bets remotely without a license, we consider violating Australian law. Can you make sure your licensees are complying? And so that was an example where DGE, New Jersey, said that fits within our definition. They did it right, concrete, affirmative, and DGE notified the online operators in the state of New Jersey, and I think there were 2 or 3 or 4 that were operating in Australia without a license. And they either had to get out or get licensed. So there's also some, this definition of black is a little different sometimes. Right away, black people think is like Iran because, it's a sanctioned country and obviously the religion does not really favor gambling. But there's another kind of definition to black. Kelci, just one other, I guess, component that is tougher for you is how do you deal with the competing jurisdictions, right? Just because New Jersey says it's so doesn't mean everyone agrees. And sometimes I know Nevada and New Jersey don't always have the same definition. So is that tough also kind of sort out different regulators, or you kind of have a sense of what their positions is on the position of black, gray, and white?
Yeah, well, we do our initial sort of survey research analysis, and then we take it to local counsel who are on the ground with those regulators day to day, seeing how things are applied, getting an understanding of sort of the political climate and the temperature of regulators in that jurisdiction. And then we just go direct to the regulators, frankly. With Nevada, I don't want to speak for Nevada Gaming Control Board, but one of our gaming partners is a former chair. And we just really look at a multitude of factors. Like you said, are there any explicit laws that speak to it? Any laws that make it lawful, unlawful? Are there AG's opinions out there that may provide some guidance? And then even if there are laws that speak direct to the point, how are they being applied even, is important to kind of analyze and look at. And then some of our clients will come to us and say, well, hey, this operator's there. The law may be gray. It may be a darker shade of gray. There may be a potential higher analysis of risk under our legal opinion, but there are operators there and they are there making profit and haven't received cease and desist letters. So then maybe because of that, they may be more open to entering the market as well.
Right.
So it's just a bunch
they
of
dime out their competition, in other words.
Yes.
Which we all know happens all the time.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any particular question? Usually this is a pretty controversial area. No questions?
There's one point just to make. When you're talking about that version of regulated, unregulated market, it has things in place. You have your KYC, you have your source of wealth. All of that is in place. So it's not like the gray market's this completely rogue space, although, you can have people that have a system where where it's easy to sign up or something like that. But those generally should not be covered within the regulated, unregulated markets.
Right. No, that's a good point. Good point. Anyway, unfortunately, we need a lot more time on this. I want to thank my panel and thank everyone for being here. Good job.
Thanks.